I've been waiting on this one. We are on with Michael T. Gilbert, legendary writer, artist, early indie comics. I got my Quack, 1976. Uh, I guess you know Frank Bruner as well. Guess he
Yeah, I've
worked
met
on.
him a few times. Sure.
Yeah, yeah. We talked with Mike Gustovich not too long ago, and he's due to come back on Saturday. And he did Cobalt Blue and Justice Machine, early indie stuff like that. But now,
hmm
like 1976, you're doing Quack. You're doing some early indie stuff that was probably distributed through mail order, wasn't it?
Well, they had a few comic shops and stuff, but that was part of it. They had the underground comics that you could distribute that also. Even before that, I had done a couple of underground comic books myself. So,
Oh,
that's
okay.
where it's. hmm
Well, what? Okay, so if you're throwing that red meat out there, Michael, what is the difference between what you would call an underground Robert Crumb stuff, maybe, uh, or Furry Freak Brothers, and I know Mike Barron collects a lot of, or that was kind of his jam back in the day. Was underground comics. What's the difference between that and what we call a mainstream comic?
Well, basically, there was all sorts of rules that you couldn't do in mainstream comics. You couldn't show overt sex.
Yeah,
You could show a lot of violence, but not to the extent that
nudity.
they were able to do in the underground comics. The undergrounds, in a lot of cases, were promoting drugs and such. There was a little bit of that in mainstream comics with Green Lantern, Green Arrow, with Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams and things like that, but not much. So and it was a more the thing about undergrounds, it was creator owned as opposed to the companies owning these things, and
Uh,
it was in most cases it was a single creator writing and drawing their stories, so unfiltered.
and probably low print on a lot of these things, right? Because they didn't have the big distribution that DC or Marvel had, and they were probably just the big two to beat till around the 80s, and then we had the black and white explosion, I guess, and Ninja Turtles
hmm
doing, and then we had the Image thing. And I've seen comics, I've been in comics, started about the time you were doing Quack, around 75, 76, collecting. And I've seen, low times, like the 80s started low, but it ended sort of high and then went into the Image stuff. Um,
hmm
and what do you think about the state of the comics today?
Well, it's up and down. I mean, the big thing now is that the death of the Diamond Comics distribution. And they were the main distributors for many years,
Hmm.
and big
Capital
comic.
before them.
Yeah, well, look, they've absorbed most of the others over the years. There were a number of
Hmm.
distributors early on in the 80s and 90s and this and that here. And now, basically, the industry has put their most of their eggs in one basket. Now this basket has disappeared. So others are trying to
Yeah.
take up the slack and such. But I'll be curious to see what happens.
It
As
affected Dynamite recently.
hmm
I guess Diamond kind of owes them some money.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of company that they owe.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, I started out and had a comic book shop when I was 17-year-old, the first one here in town. I'm in Northeast Arkansas. Where are you located at?
In Stowe, Ohio.
Okay. All right, that's right. You're in Ohio. Did you
hmm
start out there? Are those your roots, your family roots, or did you kind of migrate over the years?
Migrate. It's my wife's roots. She grew up in Ravenna, Ohio, which is about 20 minutes away from here.
Hmm.
I grew up in New York and lived most of my life there until I moved to California when I was about 25 or so, back in 1975, shortly before I started working on Quack and Star Reach and such.
Yeah.
And then eventually moved to Texas, Austin, Texas, for a couple of years. And then my wife and I, then my girlfriend, moved to Oregon. We lived about 25 years. And about 7 years ago,
Wow.
we moved back here to be closer to her family. And because we had seen a lot of already seen a lot of Oregon, and we wanted a different situation right now.
Oregon's a beautiful state with the redwoods and all that. That's kind of on my bucket list to go see
Hmm.
that and
Yeah.
that big hole out there, the Grand Canyon. But
Hmm.
I'll probably bring a shovel when I go.
Uh-huh.
But now, were you kind of upset a few years ago when you saw all that protesting going on in Portland and other places in Oregon kind of flared up? And, because that's
Well,
got to hit you where it hurts if you've lived there a long time.
well, yeah, I mean, I lived in Eugene, which is about 2 hours from Portland. You
Wow.
don't like to
Okay.
see any of that stuff going on here, but we had moved by the time most of that stuff really was working. So,
Yeah.
um, I felt myself more of an Ohio guy than an Oregon guy at that point.
Did you think you'd ever see such upheaval in America? I mean, you kind of saw it in the 60s, right?
Sure. Yeah, no, I've never seen anything like what we're going through in the last few years. It's just
Yeah.
crazy, just crazy.
It's kind of mind blowing, isn't it?
Hmm.
Uh, uh, and then, of course, the pandemic affected comics, I'm sure, and a lot of uh, local comic book places went out of business, which is
Hmm.
nothing new. I think on average about 2 years and they shut down,
Yeah.
because the business is part of it, isn't it? Business is a big part of comics.
Oh, sure. If you don't have anything to place to sell your things, you're not going to be making too many comics.
Hmm.
It's one thing to make, publish comics and, go to conventions and try and sell it by hand, but that's not the best way to go about it.
What's happening recently in Michael T. Gilbert's life? What is the artist, writer, publisher, editor? What are you working on of
I'm
late?
working at a few different things. I've been writing a comic book history column for Alter Ego magazine,
Oh,
and
Roy Thomas
with Roy Thomas, and we're
started
about
out
to.
as a fanzine in the '60s, right?
That's right. Yeah, back in
Uh-huh.
1961,
Yeah,
started by Jerry Bales with Roy Thomas, and it's amazing he's still doing it. It's his baby. But
yeah,
I have a column in there called Mr. Monster's Comic Crypt, where I find really interesting, arcane bits of comic history, and talk about different creators or weird comic books from the 40s or this or that here. And we're fast approaching issue number 200. So I've been in over 200 issues with my column, which is kind of impressive.
yeah.
A couple of years ago, I put together a book for Fantagraphics called Tops, which was reprinting a very rare comic book from the 1950s that Charles Biro put together. It was supposed to be the first comic book specifically done for adults. It only lasted 2 issues. It was Life magazine size giant.
Wow, that's
And
big.
yeah, it really was. Well, we
Mhm.
reprinted it, and in the actual large size that it was originally done, there was only 2 issues of the thing, 64 pages each. But it had stuff by Reed Crandall and George Tuska and just a lot of great people.
Early
So,
Iron Man, among other things, George
mhm,
Tuska.
yeah,
Uh, yeah, I
and
imagine you've seen some greats in your time, like
I've
Jack
seen
Kirby,
some.
maybe, or Joe Sennett, or I don't know, Gil Kane. I'm just throwing names out there. You tell
Mhm.
me.
Well, the biggest for me has been we've became friends with Will Eisner, who was probably my number one idol or pretty close to
This
it.
the spirit.
Yeah, and I've been to a studio a few times. My wife and I have come down there in Florida, and he was always very nice, very friendly, very
Hmm.
open guy. Um, so we had that, and I had a correspondence for many years with George Evans, the famous EC artist, um, and it was one of the things where I didn't find out till decades afterwards. But when I was growing up in Levittown, Long Island, as a kid, he was a few blocks away.
Wow.
So I was
That,
starting to read EC comics when I was 14, old issues,
uh-huh.
and I didn't realize he was just down the block. I would have been too embarrassed to knock on his door and say, I love your stuff, Mr. Evans. But
Right.
we did get a chance to corresponded, and we got very friendly. I got a chance to speak to him on the phone and such, so that was a thrill.
You worked on some graphic novels that I didn't know that you worked on, because we actually kind of opened them up and reviewed them on a few shows with Jake. I always get his name wrong. Jake Peak. Is it Eldrick? Jake P.
Elric.
Craig Russell.
P. Craig Russell Elric of Melnibone. Yeah.
Yeah. I was really wild that you not say ghosted it, but you helped put some of those together, right? The 80s graphic novels.
Yeah, well, I was the co-creator. I mean, the co-creator of those series. Michael Moorcock created the character and wrote the original novel that we adapted. But I was working with Roy Thomas and Craig Russell and I. Craig and I did the artwork. I moved down to Ohio originally in order to work with him on the project. It took about 2 years to do our graphic novel. And it was down here that I met my wife. So it was a very faithful situation all the way around.
Yeah. And I was surprised because I'd only seen probably, a few things, but I mean, Mr. Monster, that's probably what you're most known for, right? From Eclipse Comics. Was it published under any other besides Eclipse?
Oh, it was by a lot of different publishers. Mr. Monster seems to survive a lot more than the publishers do. It started with Pacific Comics for one story.
I love Pacific Comics. I wish it had been around for many, many more years.
They're a good
coloring.
Yeah. Well, they did the first Mr. Monster story. They commissioned it,
and I bought it. I believe,
and I bought it. Yeah, and they went under, and then Eclipse took it up, and they took. There's only one chapter published of my 3-chapter first story, and they printed the first one, and it did well enough. They wanted it. They asked for a series, so we put a series of Mr. Monster. But I've also done work Mr. Monster for Dark Horse and Tundra and Caliber, Image, and we've gone everywhere.
Over on Caliber, really? Wow. Okay. Yeah. Slave Labor. There's all kinds of little indies out there, and really indies are kind of my jam. And you're really. Did you ever really look at yourself as mainstream or more indie? Because you were doing Quack in the middle, where you were doing Star Reach,
1977,
Star Reach. You mentioned that early stuff that was not mainstream at all.
No, I never thought of myself as a mainstream creator. The closest I came to is that one of the jobs I do in between various things was doing scripts for Disney comics, Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, all this other stuff. And I was doing that for about 20 years. So that gave me a decent base income. And, and I spent the rest of my time doing Mr. Monster and, other things.
Well, back in the old days of Yellow Kid and, Cats Are Jammer Kids and things like that, really, like Eisner, like you were talking about with the Spirit, and he had a whole comic book section within newspapers all around the country. Really, the newspaper strips was where the money was, right?
Oh, yeah. If you got a good comic strip back in the 30s or 40s, you become a millionaire. I mean, there were all sorts of spin-offs, and some of the best people were able to keep the copyrights on their things. I think Al Cap had to fight to get his for Little Abner, and Milton
Frank Frazetta ghosted him on that.
A lot of people did. Yeah, sure did. Yeah. And Milton Caniff was doing Terry and the Pirates, was doing just some amazing stuff. He couldn't get the ownership of that, so he stopped doing that and created Steve Canyon, which he owned completely, and was doing that for decades. So yeah, and guys like Chuck Gould on Dick Tracy or Frank King on Gasoline Alley, they could make a fortune doing this stuff, and they did amazing work.
I got to meet the creator of Gasoline Alley in '85 and '86, and he was an old grade man by that time, and I was like, I've never heard of this person, but it was interesting to hear him talk.
Which one was it? There's been a few creators.
Of Gasoline Alley?
Oh yeah,
As far as I know, it was the original.
Harold. Let's see. Yeah, not Harold Gray. What am I saying? Frank
Now
King.
you,
Frank King.
yeah. What have been influences, the major influences on yours? Because it's kind of like you with Mr. Monster. That's kind of like a monster horror bent type character. You could
Hmm.
almost call it sort of noir
Yeah.
in a
Hmm.
way, gun-toting noir.
Yeah. Well, I've had a number of major influences that went into Mr. Monster. Will Eisner being a major influence. There was a lot of rainy backgrounds and dark shadows and things like that. um, Simon Kirby, Jack Kirby, and Joe Simon. They did some wonderful action superhero comics back in the 40s and 50s. That was part inspiration. Harvey Kurtzman's Mad Magazine or Mad Comic
Hmm.
Books,
Hmm.
things like Super Duper Man. He did a parody like
Hmm.
with Wally Wood. That's very similar to what I was trying to do with Mr. Monster.
Yeah.
Over the top. It can be serious at times, and it can be just slapstick at times, depending on what kind of story I felt like telling that month.
Hmm. So kind of fast and loose with how you just kind of felt that month and what was the creative juices. You kind of went with
Yeah,
the
I mean,
flow
I
of it.
have lots of inspirations, and I said I'd like to do a story like that guy did, or like that favorite writer or artist or whatever.
Yeah.
Maybe I want to do an EC type story, Tales from the Crypt or Weird Science, and I have the freedom since I own the character. I can go back there and do what I feel like.
Were you a collector yourself?
Oh
You
yeah, I
collected?
mean, I've been collecting comics since I was about 7, and I
Yeah.
still do.
Uh-huh.
Uh, at this point, most of my comics are digital at this point, so I can, which is wonderful because there's a ton of free gold and silver age comic books that you can get for free just from downloading. So
Right.
there's a whole slew of tens of thousands of rare comics I never would have been able to get my hands on in the past,
Yeah.
much
Yeah.
less have the room to store it. And now I do. It's great. It's a
Have
wonderful
you ever
resource.
been tempted to take some of those public domain characters and actually do something?
Well, I mean, that was Mr. Monster in the first place. It was Mr. Monster was created by Fred Kelly in 1946, and I found that I found a coverless copy of that comic at a comic convention in 1971, and
Hmm. Were you
said I
looking
want.
for it, or did you just kind
No,
of
had never seen anything like that. But there was a bin with all these coverless Golden Age comics for 50 cents,
covered?
50 cents per dollar.
How scandalous!
Yeah, well, it was great for me because I was able to scoop a bunch of them up.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
saw this one comic book coverless, and it had Mr. Monster as the lead feature. It turns out it was the only color comic before the company went under. And I said, one of these days, I would just love to revive this character and reinvent him for
Hmm.
a new age. And when I was working on Elric, there was a lull between the first series and the second series, and they offered me a position, a spot in an anthology comic called Vanguard Illustrated, where they would try out new characters and new creators and
I
such.
think I bought
And
that back in the 80s.
mhm,
Vanguard Illustrated,
yeah, yeah.
Alpha something on the first issue, maybe. I don't know.
Mm,
Alpha Alpha Team, some kind of team. I can't remember, but
yeah.
yeah, I love that independent stuff like JC Comics and Capital Comics that didn't last very long. Nexus
Yeah,
started there. Whisper,
they started Nexus and
yeah,
Badger, I think.
Whisper
And
started there.
yeah, and they went to First Comics, which was great. They
Hmm.
eventually, I started doing Elric for them after Pacific Comics went under, and they were I really liked.
I was shocked to learn last year because I haven't seen very much. I know they did a Kickstarter, was publisher of Kickstarter that First Comics is still around. They don't do much, but they're still
Mhm.
around
Well, I guess
because
anybody can buy the
I've
name
seen a
or
lot of
something.
them come and go.
Hmm.
I wanted to show an embarrassing moment for you. I was going to do it at the very beginning of the,
Anytime I can
you
be
know,
embarrassed,
and
that's
get
a
it.
good day.
So here is Michael T. Gilbert Uh, 1992 famous comic book creators card number 25, writer, artist, colorist, letter, editor, and publisher.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. And even has your stats on the back, I guess, huh? Yeah.
I kind of like that.
Okay. Born 1951 in New York City. Wow.
Hmm.
Okay. And
Yeah.
your school, State University, New York?
Yeah, I went to State University of New Paltz
Mm-hmm.
and eventually published a comic book called New Paltz Comics when I was still in college. That was my first. That was my first stories that ever got published. That was back in 1973. So that goes, really back in independence.
Yeah,
And
you meet a lot of self-taught artists, quote self-taught, but a little bit of formal training, I
mhm,
guess, is good, right? I guess in
sure,
comics there's been apprenticeships. I was uh, like Howard Chaykin kind of studied under Gil Kane, I guess.
right. Yeah, he was
So there,
lucky. I mean, I'm sure Gil was a very tough taskmaster, but that he could teach you a lot of stuff about being a professional. So,
yeah.
you know,
Well, with Gil Kane, I think there's probably no other artist that did more covers, especially for Marvels, like in the Bronze Age, the what we call the Bronze Age in the '70s. Uh,
hmm
except maybe Al Milgrom. He's done a lot of covers as well.
hmm Well, maybe Kirby, but no,
Yeah.
that's
Well, that's true. Kirby.
yeah,
It would you say he's the king of comics?
I wouldn't argue. He's terrific. No, he really is the best. I mean, the more you study
Yeah.
his stuff, the more you realize what a genius he was and what a prolific
Yeah.
genius. I mean,
Have have there
I
ever
saw some,
been any artists that you've kind of looked at first when you were younger and go, not so good, and then later you come to appreciate their work?
yeah. I mean, there's people that uh, uh, there was oh, I forget his name offhand, but he was doing the Tarzan comics for many
Oh,
years.
Burnt Hogarth?
No, no, not in the comic books for the Dell comics.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
This
yeah.
it's funny. I was just talking about him today for some reason. Now I
Russ
can't.
Manning, maybe. I think he did some.
No, no, but he was the main Tarzan artist in the 50s and such.
Okay,
Um, and he was solid artist, but he wasn't flashy. It was just
right.
a good solid
I
thing
wouldn't
here.
call Wally Wood flashy.
Yeah, he could be when he wanted to be. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah. But he's good, isn't he?
oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Um, but that's one of the ones. There's some people, but it depends
you
what you
haven't.
look at. I mean, you could look
Yeah,
at some of the later stuff of Don Heck or something like that. He gets a bad rap.
yeah.
But
I
I had
think
seen his
so.
earlier. I had already seen his earlier stuff, which was much better when he was doing non-superhero work. When he
Like
was doing,
the early '50s stuff. He did a lot of covers, a lot of horror
Mhm.
type stuff, kind of in
And he
your
really
Mr.
did it.
Monster jam that I never knew he did till later. Because I wasn't collecting back in the '50s. But
Hmm.
he really, and Steve Ditko kind of did that too. Kind of came out of doing some things, and did. I know Captain 3D with Joe Simon and Jack Kirby. That was like his third stuff ever published.
I think it was his
So
first stuff. Actually, he was doing a little bit of
was
inking on that
mhm. Okay,
kind of stuff here. But his, uh, as far as I know, his first comic was Daring Love. It was a little story, and the first published comic was a thing called Stretching Things, which we reprinted in Mr. Monster Comics. And it was right from the start. He was just great. Just got better.
if you had advice for people that want, what would you say is maybe some of the biggest pitfalls within the business of comics that you have to look out for people?
You have to look out, crooked publishers, who don't want to pay, or distributors who
Hmm.
go under. Um,
Right.
you don't want to do a lot of work. There's always people that want you to illustrate their stories without getting paid. You'll do it on speculations, so you don't necessarily want to do that.
Yeah.
You want to make sure that you meet your obligations, meet your deadlines and such. You try and get a high quality work, stuff like that.
Did you ever feel the heat of the deadline?
Oh, all the time. And sometimes I didn't make it. So, but sometimes I was forced to choose between doing the best job I could or doing it on deadline. And uh, I would sometimes just, it was important for me to get, for it to be high quality. And if I miss the deadline, well, that's unfortunate.
With comic book work, I kind of have to keep that in the back of my head, Michael, that I may not be seeing this artist's best work. We don't know what the deadline for some of these projects were.
Oh, sure. I mean, especially when you have some artists who get pulled. They're, I guess Vince Coletta would be the poster child. He was an inker, and anytime they were bad, behind the Marvel was behind the deadlines, they get him, and he could do 15, 20 pages over a weekend. So you're not going to get your best work, but you'll get it out in time to not miss the printing deadline.
I mentioned 3D comics, and you've worked on some 3D comics, probably with Ray Zone, right? Doing the 3D.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. You've even got the 10-cent there. I've never even seen this one. Is this is this a cover done by you? It looks like your stuff.
Yeah, that's my cover. It reprinted Jack Cole crime comics, but I did a new cover for it.
That was the cool thing about the the new direct market. I never knew that the direct market was kind of a big death knell to the old system that had been around on the distribution forever.
Mm-hmm.
That within about 5 years, it was affecting the newsstands and the visibility of comics, really.
Mm-hmm. Well,
you can't go into a pharmacy, you can't go into a grocery store and stumble upon a Michael T. Gilbert or a Jack Kirby, a giant treasury edition. About the only thing we're left with are Archie digests at the checkout.
Right. Well, I mean, that was the comic industry in the early 70s was dying anyway. I mean, everybody was talking about, well, is this going to be the end of it? This and that here, because they were printing hundreds of thousands of copies of the comic books. And if they didn't sell, they'd send them back, and they'd get money for that. So those things were trashed and pulped, and it was a very wasteful system. And somebody figured out, Phil Suling figured out that if you printed fewer, but you say, we won't send it back to you, we won't destroy it, we'll pay for you in advance. And it was much more economically feasible at that point. And then comic book shops were starting at that point, so there were back issue shops and this and that here. But indeed, it led to us not having stuff in the spinner rack and the comics and in the drugstores and such like we had when I was growing up. But I don't think we would have had comics at all if that hadn't
really. Well, I know we lost a big one, and I got to meet him one year, Jim Shooter, but kind of gave him a hard time. I'll tell you that story later.
Oh, yeah.
Because I believe the hype, like he's a taskmaster, he's tough and all that. But really, Marvel was like 6 months behind, according to him, on some titles. And like you said, comics were kind of going through an upheaval and dying. You were there kind of sort of with your hand on the pulse of things. Can you tell us more about that, about what was comics just going through at that time? The sentiment by people, was it just distribution that was the problem?
There's a number of things. This was in the late 70s. That's when I was working on my alternate comic stuff. But I had largely stopped buying a lot of the mainstream comics because I thought a lot of the work was getting pretty mediocre, and Jim Shooter got the trains running on time, but most of the stuff looked unimpressive to me. There's a few highlights like Walt Simonson's Thor and Frank Miller's Daredevil and a couple others, but the majority of the stuff had things like what was that giant crossover that he had with every comic in the world.
Was it Secret Wars,
Yeah, the
or was
Secret
that?
Wars.
Yeah. I know
Yeah.
they started out with Contest of Champions, which was only 3 issues, but it was kind of, to them, a big summer event. So that was
Right.
kind of, and now that's become standard. And then they kind of went to every 6 months, they've got 2 big events. I think
Hmm.
that's too much because you get reader fatigue, especially you have diehard collectors that want to collect all the different things. Well, if you've got, there's not enough money in the world to buy everything.
Right. I remember when DC's New 52 came out, 52 different titles, and you had to
Yeah.
get them all, and this and that here. And
Yeah.
then, we're reinventing it. Everything has changed forever. And then, of course, a year or two later, here's the new thing, and we've scrapped this, and we're doing something entirely new again. If I was, buying that stuff, which I wasn't, I'd say, well, enough. You told me this was real. You told me this is changed forever, but it's just not.
Has there ever been a time you haven't collected comics?
No, not really. I mean, I've always been collecting comics, but
Mhm.
whether it be underground comics at a certain point, or indie comics, or I don't buy titles per se. I buy creators. I would be back in the 80s and 90s. I buy anything that Alan Moore did. I would buy anything that Frank Miller was doing back in the 80s.
Mhm.
Uh, that's
Watchmen,
what interested me. Hmm?
Watchmen. I mean,
Oh,
that was the thing. I got started a little bit. You're probably a little older than I am. I turned 60 this year.
uh,
So I never got to see that New York newsstand, that
hmm.
would have been on the corner, but you probably did, right? You probably
Oh
got
yeah.
to buy some of your comics from there. That's
Oh sure.
awesome.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. See, you
And
should,
like,
I almost want to, because it's, wow, I would love to do that. And I'll never get to do that, probably,
hmm.
you know.
Well, I mean,
I know DC is reprinting some stuff and putting out stands like this. I was fortunately to get this and say, hey, if I buy the rest of them, can I get the stand? Because I like to
uh,
do that. But really, it's hard to find anything out besides the little Archie Digest out in the wild anymore. I hope that kind of turns around, but really, we can't go back to that old distribution system. It's no
yeah, I
longer
mean,
there, is it?
when the independent back in the early 70s, when they changed the things, the distribution is because there was so little profit in selling each comic book for the distributors. They didn't want to handle comics anymore, and and the comics didn't want to raise the price appreciably because they figured people wouldn't buy it anymore. So they were on a death spiral at that point.
Did you like Big Little Books from Whitman?
I was never into that really.
Mhm.
I didn't get too much into the pulps either. I mean, love looking at the covers, but I was never a huge reader. I was always into comic books or graphic novels or things like that.
Eric says
Oh,
Jesse
Jesse
Marsh,
Marsh,
maybe.
right? Yes,
Uh-huh.
that was it. Yeah,
Yeah.
he was good, and he again, not a flashy guy. I was much more impressed when Joe Kubert took over a few years later, and Russ Manning did a beautiful job. But you look at those Tarzans, and they're very down to earth. And he would look at actual. It took place in Africa, and he knew his Africa. You know what the topography of Africa was like, and the plants, and all this other stuff that didn't particularly interest me as a kid, but I'm impressed with it now.
Any movies influence your work?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Because black and white noir used to be a big thing,
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I love noir movies.
and we're old enough to have seen the transition from black and white to color TV. I've
Mhm.
recently been going through all 20 seasons of Gunsmoke.
Oh yeah, that's some good stuff, and The Fugitive is terrific.
Yeah, yeah. In
Um,
color. It was
mhm.
in color,
In color, and when
or the Invaders in color, the
right,
Quinn Martin production,
right.
right?
Well, when I was a kid, I was just a huge fan of the Superman TV show. As a little kid
New
watching.
Adventures of Superman with George
Yeah,
Reeves. Yeah.
sure. And Twilight Zone. I
Mhm.
love those little short stories, and they
Outer Limits.
Outer Limits.
Yeah, Beyond something. Yeah, there was different ones that were kind of
One Step Beyond.
one step beyond. There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and Star Trek, the original Star Trek, and I wouldn't miss an episode of that.
yeah. He
So there was
wrote
some,
Gene Roddenberry wrote some Gunsmoke. Sam
yeah,
Peckinpah, the
yeah.
director, did too. Yeah.
Hmm.
So very good stories, early on, it's amazing it ran for I guess it's the longest running Western really from and recently Gunsmoke was in the news. It was number 18 over, on rewatch streaming type stuff.
Yeah,
People are still watching it,
no,
good
it's interesting.
stories. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was many years later that I got a chance to see the earliest ones, which were black and white half-hour shows, as opposed to the hour shows, which they were for many years for the rest of the
Mhm.
time. So I
Uh,
like Have Gun Will Travel. They had some. Oh, I always loved The Rifleman. That was one of my favorite.
oh yeah, Chuck Connors. Yeah.
Yeah,
And Branded. He went on to do Branded and other
right.
things. Yeah.
One does the one who
Uh,
ran. What do you do when you're
yeah.
branded? But you know you're a man. Yes.
Chuck Connors was a pitcher, a major league pitcher.
Hmm.
Did you know that?
Yeah, I heard that. Yeah.
I think he got to play with DiMaggio and all them around that time.
Yeah.
Amazing. But they never made a trading card like you have.
Yeah, well, they may have, but
Yeah. Yeah. Do you get a percentage from that? I mean, like when Skyboxer, Fleer, Tops does a card like that or something, did you
oh, I get
sign on to that or they
I don't
approach you?
recall if I got paid for that. I probably did.
Yeah.
It was just
A mere
those
pittance.
small
Yeah.
amounts. It doesn't matter,
Alms for the poor.
right? Well, that thing was about 30 years ago, so whatever I got, I'm sure I enjoyed.
Yeah. Nice mustache, by the way.
Well, none here, but back then I did.
Yeah, back
It
then.
was
Yeah.
funny because I had a Fu Manchu like this, and then it got shorter and shorter, and now here I am.
Yeah. Is there a creator that you never got to meet that you would have liked to work with or at least met?
Oh, I would have loved to meet Steve Ditko. He's always been one of my idols.
Yeah.
Um,
Kind of elusive, huh? Never did conventions, kind of a Howard Hughes type, right?
yeah, he did one convention. He did the very first convention in New York in 1965. And I think that
Yeah.
convinced him to never go to another one after that. He
Yeah.
wasn't too happy. But
Yeah. You do a lot of conventions though, don't you? Or have in the past?
I've done a number of them. Yeah, sure.
Hmm.
I don't. Maybe at this point, maybe one or two a year. Um, uh, there were a lot of work. So, and I'm kind of lazy. So anytime I can
Yeah.
just stay home and draw, that's better
If
for
you were
me.
to break down Mr. Monster for people,
Mhm.
what would you say it's about?
Well, he's the world's greatest monster fighter. Um, and like I say, the tone of the stories change from issue to issue. Sometimes it's really straightforward monster fighter. Sometimes it's it has silly stories or a science fiction story. Um, uh, it's been my thing. I've been doing Mr. Monster off and on for about 40 years now, and right now I'm working on a proposed series of books that I think I'm working with. Hopefully, with Fantagraphics, we'll work on it, collecting all the various Mr. Monster stories from all the different publishers. So I've been busy recoloring some stories and finding the best reproduction copies and organizing them. And right now,
That's got to be difficult, right?
I had to go through a lot of boxes in my studio and finding things because the technology has changed so much since 1983 when I did my first Mr. Monster drawing. And now, of course, you can scan things and do the coloring, and it's so much easier to correct or send stuff. But back then you had negatives, you had all sorts of arcane stuff. Since then, I've thrown away my negatives. They're of no use anymore. But for many years, that was the thing you would use.
I know Neil Adams was like trying to find, good scans of some of his former work. I know a lot of people until the early 80s didn't keep original artwork or production artwork or things like that. I know some people did, but it's amazing that so much of that was shredded, destroyed, and thrown away.
Yeah, DC would take their original artwork and have people just chop them up, throw them out. They had no respect for the stuff here. We've been lucky in a couple of cases because the old Harvey Comics had a warehouse full of the comic books they did back in the 50s and 40s. Yeah. And
I bought a bunch of them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, near mint condition. It's like, wow,
Yeah, well, it's amazing. Well, they probably just put it there and didn't think about it,
Yeah.
And the best one for that was Bill Gaines over at EC Comics, who knew the value of the comics that he was publishing with Frazetta and Wally Wood and Jack Davis and all these other, the best of the best of the best. And he would wrap them up carefully, put them in a vault someplace. And when it came down to reproducing them for the EC library, he had the stuff there. And it was just, beautiful stuff. He had real respect for the artist and the work. He was a fan as much as he was a publisher. And that's kind of rare.
Any thoughts on Seduction of the Innocent in the mid-50s, the McCarthy era?
Yeah,
it really affected comics. They were burning comics.
Oh, yeah. Well, he was certainly right. The comics were the worst thing in the world. I mean, look at us all. I mean, no, he's a quack. I mean, I think he started out as a well-intentioned quack, but I think ultimately he was decades later. He was found to have doctored information and if he was saying, yeah, well, everything was a crime comic to him. You look at a Donald Duck comic, and it's a crime comic. Because,
do you think they got too graphic for kids? Because I mean, you had like eye damage covers and beheadings, or is that good? Children can discern the difference, right?
Well, the parents should be the ones to be saying, I don't want you reading this stuff. Mm-hmm. We don't need the government telling us about it. And if they were shooting for different audiences, it's just, there were stuff that was for kiddies, and there was stuff that were for teenagers, and there's stuff for, the adults would read them. I mean,
really, so comics came in with the authority code, and that kind of destroyed EC. They had to switch to like Mad. I know they tried in the very first few years their pictorial comics and different things like that, but it never really scored. It was almost like trying to, after the boys came home from war in World War II, the superhero genre kind of went down, and then Simon and Kirby invented the romance comic, if you will, and things kind of shift. Westerns came in, of course, big time. I think at one time the top 30 something shows were westerns. We were getting westernized in America. It's amazing.
Yeah, well, Dell Comics would do a lot of adaptations of movies and TV series, and so they had a ton of Western comics. Roy Rogers and Gene Autry, Have Come Real Trouble. Any show that they had on there, they would have a comic book of it. So,
I like that because it was a variety. You never knew what you were going to get. That's their kind of 4-color. I think the very first one is unnumbered, and it's a Dick Tracy one. I mean, we're talking early mid 30s at this point, like Cracker Jack comics and things like that. More fun comics with national publication, which later known as DC Comics.
Right.
A lot of history with comics. It's been called an American art form, like jazz or baseball. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, I wouldn't be in this business if I didn't think comics were an art form. Yeah.
Well, the authority code really had to affect your stuff, right? I mean, because it was becoming more lax, and there was a horror, sort of like Tomb of Dracula and all the Marvel magazines that came from Curtis and things like that. Monsters were kind of in vogue in the early 70s.
Yeah, they were. But at that point, already seen the pre-code stuff, so it's kind of hard to compete with top of the line
Yeah.
EC Tales from the Crypt and the crazy horror comics they had
Well, now
back in the
see, you
50s.
seem a little young to have bought EC Comics off the stands.
Well, I got my first ECs in 1965 when I was about 14.
Okay,
So it
that's when I
was.
was born, by the way.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm 74 at
Twice.
this point,
Okay.
and it seemed these incredibly rare old comic books, which were about 10 or 12 years old. So you can
Yeah.
they weren't old at all, but they sure seemed like it. And it was
Yeah.
hard to find. You didn't have comic shops back then, and there were a few people selling stuff through the mail or whatever. They had Bobby Bell and things like that, but
Hmm.
um, sometimes there'd be. Uh, we had something called the farmers market. My father did some tailoring work on the weekends there, but there was a big thing where they had all sorts of vendors, small vendors,
Hmm.
and uh, there was one of them that had some old comic books, for a dollar
And
or two
probably old
dollars.
Life magazines, old Time
Mhm.
magazines, and everything. Right? You sell a little
Right.
bit of everything. Hope
Yeah.
to find some comics in there somewhere.
hmm Yeah, but they had a little
Yeah.
section of it, and they even had a smattering of Golden Age comics, so I was able to get some comics. Those were some of my first things. And they also had in the '60s, late '50s, they had something called IW comics, which are reprints from the
Oh yeah.
'40s, '50s. If you remember any of those.
I
Um,
do. And the earliest ones are like number one issues in the late 50s. And then I think it was the publisher that bought out a warehouse and had all these plates, right? So he
right,
was, and I see a lot of Ross Andrew artwork, in some of those books.
right. So
Um,
yeah, a lot of those cases they had the plates for the insides, but they didn't have the covers, so they made new covers, and that's when Ross Andrew was doing it. Gray Morrow did some of the
but
covers.
really, he didn't have the copyright rights to do that, did he? I think he kind of phased out and then kind of came back and changed it to like Super Quality Comics or something from
Yeah,
IDW or
it
IW
was
rather.
IW, and then it became
Mhm.
Super Comics, but it's the
Yeah,
same thing, just different
yeah,
name.
yeah, yeah. I actually have one from 1965 that
hmm
still has 10 cents, and it must have been the cheapest comic on the stands because they had already went to 12 cents by a few years by that point.
Well, the thing that was neat about the IW comics was they were selling directly to stores,
Oh,
like supermarkets.
hmm,
I saw some at a place on Long Island called John's Bargain Stores, and they had a big bin with a bunch of these things in it,
hmm,
which means they didn't have to go through the usual magazine distribution, which means they weren't censored, so they could print pre-code comics and get them out here. When I was looking at some of those things, I remember one time there was a bin and it had a spirit and a spirit comic and a plastic man and
hmm.
uh, Phantom Lady, stuff that hadn't been around for 15 years.
Yeah.
But they had the plates and they printed them. So this was my first exposure to a lot of that stuff. It was very
Mm.
exciting seeing.
And you were probably like, there's
Phantom Lady, yes, yes.
yeah, I mean, you got to be a collector to know the bug, don't you? To like finding something that, y- stumbling upon something unexpectedly and it opening up a new menu for you. Like
Sure.
an old Spirit or Police comics with Plastic Man or something in there.
Yeah, well, I remember, when I was about 9 years old or 10 years old, the first Superman annual came out. It was about 1960. And it was just thrilling to see, the origin stories of, how Superman came from Krypton or the
Mhm.
first Metallo story or, whatever it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I cut my teeth on one of those DC 60 centers that you know, were really cool. And then when one thing that they started doing in the early 80s was the little digest comics.
Mhm.
Adventure Comics, in its last 2 years of publishing, was an anthology. Adventure Comics that had like the Vigilante, which was Golden Age character,
Yeah.
had Legion of Superheroes that Jim Shooter started when he was like 12, 13 years old, writing, and creating that a lot of the
Yeah. Well,
characters like Karate
his
Kid.
first series. It was his first series, but he didn't create the series. But
Right. But
he was
now
his
he
first series.
created some of the characters, didn't he? Like
Sure.
Princess Projectora and Karate Kid and Furo Lad. I think he created,
Hmm.
along the way. But and I got a lot of DC backstory from that. Reading the little digest that actually reprinted, and then also they were so neat that often I would cross over and do like a Jonah Hex or Sergeant Rock,
Hmm.
something non superhero.
Hmm.
Um, and I thought that was neat because I was getting and could have a little bitty library, almost like those little Whitmans. Comics kind of came about from the publishers needing to keep the presses running, right?
Right. And they figured out if they reprinted the comic strips from the newspapers and cut them in half into quarters, they can sell them as comic books. And they did that originally back in the early 30s.
Do,
And
do, do you have a favorite cover artist? I mean, or can you name like a top 5 cover artists you like to see?
well, it's hard to beat some of the Frank Frazetta, Buck Rogers covers that he did back in the 50s. They're
Yeah.
spectacular. Um, uh, Steve
What
Ditko
made them
did
so spectacular to you?
with super fine line. There was an intensity to some of the characters and the
Hmm.
situations.
Hmm.
Um, it pulled you in.
It pulled
Steve
you in.
Ditko's covers for Spider-Man. A lot of those were just terrific and just fascinated by me.
Mhm.
Harvey Kurtzman's covers for Mad and for Frontline Combat and Two Fisted Tales. Very dramatic, powerful
Mhm.
covers that just pulled me right in.
Yeah, Mad Magazine started off comic book size, didn't it?
Yeah, it did for the first
Mhm.
23 or something like that issues.
Mhm.
And of course, Jack Kirby had some of the best covers too. I mean, I
Yeah.
look some of those. He had some Fighting American covers back in the 50s with Joe Simon. That is just spectacular. Just the essence of energy and power and movement. You know,
Mhm.
he had it all.
What how do you try and pace your comics, your stories? You try and mix it up and do different beats, or is there kind of like a first act, middle act, and conclusion?
It'll vary from story to story. You often try and build up to something in a uh, big climax or something. But I've had some stories where it starts off very slow and the action happens, then it ends very slow. And I've had ones, some that just go, full speed ahead. It just
Yeah.
depends what kind of story I feel like that time.
How important is the cover to a comic book?
I don't know if it's as important as it used to be, but back, in the days of collectors nowadays, I have to get every issue of this title. So, it doesn't matter if who did the cover of that issue, but back in the 40s and 50s and 60s, the cover would be the thing you'd see and would catch your attention. And I got to get this thing because I don't know what's going to happen here. This looks really interesting. What's Superman's got 2 heads this issue? How did that happen? I got to buy this comic
Yeah.
and find out.
Red kryptonite.
Right, right.
Yeah. They had some deadly forms of kryptonite that would totally rob your powers. I think gold kryptonite,
Yeah.
white kryptonite, like destroyed plant life. So that's kind of useless,
All
but
right.
it's neat that they kind of came up with different
Yeah.
radioactive elements of old
I think
Krypton.
I think blue kryptonite hurt Bizarros, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
And then later, you got different power rings and things like that. Or what are you currently reading, Michael, yourself and collecting?
um, Geez. Well, I continue to download comics from the 40s and 50s. Right now, I just finished. There was a rather crazy series called Madam Satan in one of the series, and I've been enjoying that. She's some evil woman that Satan has picked to get souls, and so she goes and she tries to corrupt men. And kiss me, you fool! And if they do, they die, and they're cursed forever. So that's the kind. I mean, that's the kind of stuff like I like going back on some of this old stuff in particular. And if I see some newer stuff of creators that I like, Bill Griffith has done a thing on the creator of Nancy, which is really interesting. I'm doing. I picked out a book of Stan Mack had did real life funnies back in the 70s, 80s, 90s. Little 1-page stories of things he overhears in real life and writes down. I find that interesting. So there's just just a ton of stuff out there.
What's your
just a
feeling
wealth
on censorship of material?
I don't care for it.
Yeah.
I mean, write what you want, and then if someone doesn't like it, don't buy it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I need someone
what drew you to underground comics? Because a lot of people would say that's salacious material.
Yeah, well, I mean, the whole point was it came from in the wake of the comics code. Everything was tamed and cut and this and that. I think these people were just itching to break that whole thing, to see what we can do, how far can we push. Bob Crumb and S. Clay Wilson and guys like that were trying to do whatever they see how outrageous they could do it. I wouldn't give that to a 5-year-old, but I read it when I was about 20 and I was fascinated by it.
Yeah.
Again, not a big brother telling me what I can read.
Boobies. You'd see boobies.
Oh, right. You'd see plenty of those.
Yeah. With Robert Crumb, and others. Yeah. Furry Freak Brothers. Like you said, it's kind of the drug culture, right? The 60s were kind of like I don't know. How would you describe the 60s? Because I think there were some good things come out of the 60s. I think for me, long before I read a comic book, I watched the cartoons, Herculoids and Space Ghost, and I didn't realize that Gray Morrow was kind of like on Spider-Man 67, and Alex Toth was working with Hanna-Barbera for decades, and Johnny Quest. I mean, probably the greatest comic. The greatest, adventure type
animated adventure.
Yeah. And people died. They got shot and stuff. And then Ted Kennedy came in with legislation to protect the children from violence or whatever and destroyed all that for decades.
Right.
I was like, where are all the good cartoons, especially the superhero stuff like My Tour, or Young Samson?
Well, now it's funny because their whole channels devoted to cartoons, and you can have super adult cartoons, and you can have stuff that the kids would really like, and all sorts of stuff here.
Heavy metal type like that, Metal Hurlant. Yeah,
sure. Yeah. Powerpuff Girls, things like that too.
Right. Yeah, Cartoon Network. That's got to be a godsend for people that love cartoons. Was animation ever a big part of your life?
It's never anything I wanted to do, but
Right.
I certainly love looking at it. One of the earliest stuff that I saw on TV that I just was crazy about was those old Fleischer Superman cartoons, which I thought were just amazing. 5 minutes of pure power and energy and movement, and
rotoscoping.
What's that?
Rotoscoping. A lot of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm looking forward to King of the Hill, it's going to be coming back
Hmm.
after being gone for 10, 15 years. But I thought it was one of the best TV series, animated or live, that I've seen. Very well written.
I
And
think The Simpsons probably has the record for seasons,
sure,
don't they?
yeah, they do.
That's kind of
Although I haven't,
amazing, isn't it?
yeah, although I haven't looked at The Simpsons in many years, but
Mhm.
for one time, at one point, it was, must see TV.
Yeah,
But
well,
I know,
I mean, Hanna-Barbera had the Flintstones, the Jetsons, Huckleberry Hound. That was all prime time on TV.
Mhm.
So the cartoons weren't just for the children; they were also for the adults. And then you get into Rocky and Bullwinkle with Jay Ward, then that's really the jokes were aimed at the adults as much as the children, weren't they?
Yeah, I'm much more impressed with the Jay Ward stuff than the Hanna Barbera material. I never
Hmm.
cared that much for it, except when I
Or
was,
Tex
very young.
Avery. We got to mention Tex
Oh,
Avery.
sure. Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, stuff
yeah.
from the 40s, and from there, and any of the Fleischer Brothers stuff in the 30s, and crazy stuff, the Betty Boop and whatnot.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
there's a lot.
yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm impressed that that Jack Kirby started as kind of an in-betweener on Popeye in the 30s, and then
Mhm.
of course he did two Scooby Doo episodes. I'm told,
Did he?
uh,
I didn't know about
a-
that. Mhm.
and he also did Fantastic Four in the late 70s, a run on that, and then he
Mhm.
did Thundar the Barbarian, sort of as a character creator and stuff. So
Mhm.
he had some animating chops in him.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think I better be winding this down pretty soon.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Michael, I'm very cognizant of your time. Thank you for giving me 30 minutes more
Okay.
over our allotted time. I've enjoyed speaking with you, and I hope you'll come back sometime.
Sure thing. It was great talking to you, Rex. Take
Great
care.
to talk to you, Michael. Take care.